And we're live. Good evening, everybody. It's Brendan Baylod from the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group. I'm here tonight with my special guest, Ross Richardson, who I've wanted to have on the show for a long time. Ross, good to have you. Welcome to the show.
Well, hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Very cool. I'm excited to have you too. I've been trying to get you to be on the show now for I think almost since I've been doing it. But anyway, let's give it some time for some people to join, and I'd like to encourage our viewers as they come on to comment in the comments area. Let us know you're there so we can hear you before we start getting into some of the housekeeping here. So Ross, I think it was last season we were trying to hook up, and it was an odd time, what with the plague and all, and
yeah.
There's a lot going on for both of us. We're pretty busy in what we call the working season, But now that it's cold out, we both got some time.
Yeah. Last year was a really weird year about this time. Definitely culture shift, and now things, I guess, are a little more normalized, and a little more focused back on shipwrecks, other than what's going on around us.
Yeah, strange times, and I know. God, it's been weird. I haven't been out of the house all week. I go whole weeks without even leaving my house. Hopefully that's going to change. I've got a bunch of big projects planned for this summer. I got my annual trip up to Isle Royale this year, and last week's guest Ken Verana and I are cooking up a project up at Isle Royale together. We might go up and look for the little passenger steamer Dagmar that has lost off Chippewa Harbor there on the south shore of Isle Royale. Be an interesting project. We'd be doing it sort of with the Park Service's blessing, and seeing if we can find it. So fun stuff. Yeah. One of the many little projects, and of course I got my usual wrecks that I invariably look for without success. But if you don't look for them, they never get found. So, well, we got some people joining. It looks like we've got almost 20 viewers right now. So,
excellent.
Welcome everybody. People are starting to join. So again, now that we've got a few people, welcome to my special guest, Ross Richardson. Ross and I have known each other for, oh God, I don't even remember how long. We'll talk about that in the show. But
it's got to be pushing 20 years.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure to have Ross on, because Ross and I are what we call second generation wreck hunters. There's the old guys before us that kind of really paved the way. There aren't a lot of guys our age that are doing this. He's sort of the Brendan Baylod of Michigan. I'm sort of the Ross Richardson of Wisconsin, if you will.
And maybe we're third generation, maybe fourth. I don't know. It's it's really tough to figure out. Well, Dick Race probably is one of the top guys, and John Steele. Kent Bell Richard maybe is in there, and then you get the next generation of maybe Dave. I think maybe Dave and Paul, David Trotter, Paulie Horner, maybe the next generation started with them. Yes. I don't know.
That's right, Steve Radovan. You're right. There's a good age spread between your Paulie Horns and Steve Radovans, and your Gene Turners and Dick Races and John Steeles. So that is true. And we're kind of maybe third generation, but
third. And if you go back even further to some of the guys, Deviney and some of those guys out of the 50s, that they were doing it too. Not as, maybe that was a little more swashbuckling, not as much research, a little more treasure hunting type. But it's an interesting progression. That's always fascinated me is the wreck hunters. I guess maybe that's why I tried to become one. Is that just really intrigued me.
And the skill these guys had to have back in those days to do this without any electronic GPS, and with these primitive kind of remote sensing tools, and in some cases without any remote sensing tools.
Oh yeah, the stories of Gene Turner and the butcher hooks and hooking them on bed springs and dragging them around the bottom out there in an open boat in Lake Michigan, just dragging the bottom with this stuff. And that's how they did it back then. Threw in a buoy and ran between the buoys. And, if you had somebody that could operate a sextant, wow, that was big stuff. Someone that could plot on a chart a little bit. I mean, that's early. Yeah, pre-Loran, pretty amazing. But there were a ton of wrecks out there, and they weren't found yet. So I mean, it almost moves along with the technology. The technology gets better, but there's less wrecks. More wrecks are discovered by the time technology comes out.
And they were in a lot better shape then too. I mean, and one of the things I've always pointed out to people is that these things have a shelf life. They were in a lot better shape in the 1950s and 60s, and we see pictures of that. And
oh, yeah.
they're degrading, and 40 years from now, they're going to be gone. You won't have these. There'll be some deep wrecks out there maybe still that haven't been found yet, but even those, they all have a shelf life. 100 years from now, they're going to be gone, even the steel ones.
Yeah. Yeah, they definitely are deteriorating. And, if you're doing diving for 10, 20 years, you can start going back to ones you did early and like, wow, collapse here, boards missing there.
Yeah, I know Ken Merriman's trying to get them all through photogrammetry, which is, I think, a really good idea. He's starting a regular database of all the sites that they've done with photogrammetry because he recognizes that these things are all going to be gone. And we had a long talk about it on the Hey Boy, and I really applaud what he's doing there. So we should probably get started on the interview. We got a couple of things to cover. A little bit of housekeeping first. I want to let everybody know that next week's guest is going to be none other than Pat Labadie. I've been trying to get Pat on the show for a long time. Pat is sort of the godfather of maritime historians. He's the guy with all the ship photos, the guy with all the vessel data. Pat was worked at the Dawson Museum in Detroit for many years before becoming the curator up at the Canal Park Museum in Duluth. And then finally, in his later years, became the historian at the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary. And his collection is now there, as well as the database that he started is at the Alpena Public Library. So a real towering figure in Great Lakes maritime history. And I'm so pleased to have him on the show next week. You won't want to miss it. Tell your friends and family. All right. Let's put up some slides and shut off the widgets. All right. So Ross, you've had quite a career already on the lakes, doing wreck hunting and doing a lot of maritime history stuff. You present all over the place. Tell me a little bit about your background and how you got involved in this. Obviously, growing up in Lower Michigan, you were on the lakes, but what made you think about shipwrecks? What made you want to go look for them?
Well, it really started off as a very young kid. I was always a very good swimmer. I was more comfortable in water than I was on land. And we had a pool when I was younger. I mean, we're talking 4 or 5 years old. And one of the things I would do, I'd put a mask on. We would had older brothers who would build model ships. Well, we would sink them in the pool and then go down and look at them with our masks. That's some of my earliest memories. And then when I went to elementary school, we'd go to the library and I would gravitate towards books like books on the Titanic, things like that, sea disasters. And I really don't know why that appealed to me. It just did. It was just something I was intrigued by. But time goes by and I kind of drifted away from there. And then in 1997, the movie Titanic came out, and that was about the same time the book Ship of Gold in the Deep Blue Sea came out.
Oh yeah.
And I can remember being at a library about that time and looking through books and then coming across some Great Lakes stuff. And then, I used to hang out at the beach when I was a kid in Holland, Michigan, Grand Haven. And it was Swayze's book, Shipwrecked. And I started looking through what was missing off of Grand Haven and I was like, wow, there's big ships out there that haven't been found yet. How can this be in today's day and age that there's still shipwrecks out there? And that kind of started me on a quest of getting involved and looking for shipwrecks. And that led me to meeting up with Craig Rich, who's kind of the first guy that really taught me about shipwrecks, research, everything. Craig Rich, of course, from the MSRA based out of Holland, Michigan. And just a wealth of knowledge. He was on the cutting edge, just as early days of the internet. And, I learned a lot from him, and I was lucky to get involved in the MSRA, which, is Valerie Van Hees, Craig Rich, and a few others. And really, when you hang out with those type of talented people, it rubs off on you. You just get some of that by osmosis, guess. And so the early days, I was just blessed to be able to be hooked into that group, and that's where I met up with David Trotter. The MSRA would contract with David Trotter and have him over every spring to look for shipwrecks for 10 days or 14 days. And I would take time off work to go out and drive the search boat, because I wanted to learn how to do this. And, you can't go to school for this. You have to do it. You have to basically learn it. So I would take time off work. Everybody would do the weekends. I would try to do during the week so I could get time with Dave. And I wouldn't pester him, but I would just sit back and look and learn, watch what he's doing. And, I consider Dave Trotter the Henry Ford of shipwreck hunting. He figured out a process to be very successful. And that's kind of who I emulated on a smaller scale. Now, he has a bigger operation. He covers a lot more territory, but I kind of base myself on what he was doing because he was so successful at it. And there's a genius to what he does and how he does it.
Yeah, we had so it was quite an interview. I know he definitely covers a lot of ground when he does it.
Oh, they hit it hard when they can, and he just had a great process and putting together the right crew and everything, and the right attitude because it can be dejecting looking year after year and not finding anything, and I know firsthand. I spent about 10 years before I actually was on the boat when we found a wreck. And that was a lot of time, we're talking 40 hours a week, or I'm sorry, 40 hours a year, 60, 80 hours a year on the water, just searching and not finding anything. But the lakes are big and wrecks are hard to find. And especially over in the southwest part of Lake Michigan or the southeast part where there's just not that many wrecks. They're not concentrated, so they're more difficult to find. Oh,
yeah. So here's a blast from the past. What year is this? I'm trying to look at the data on this. I actually have this paper as well. 1990, no, 2002. That's Dave Meisch. That's me, and that's you, and that's the schooner Helen. Tell us, that's me in the top there. Tell us a little bit about how this all went down.
Yeah, so I was in the early days of the MSRA, and there was a meeting in South Haven. About that time, a gentleman by the name of Dave Meisch had found the shipwreck. He was out on his boat, and he was kicked. Something happened, and he kicked something, and he looked down, and there was the Helen, which covers and uncovers with the sand. So he contacted you, me. I don't know how we all got linked up together. But we all met up there and we dove the Helen, and that was what, 2002?
Yeah, I remember that's the first time I ever met you, but I knew of you, and I knew I was had been working with the MSRA on and off at that point, and I had come over because the Helen was a scow schooner, and she was amazingly intact, and you and I went out there and checked her out, and it was just an amazing experience. It was a really, really a pleasure to meet you at that time. And I think that was the first time we ever got to know each other.
Yeah. That was neat. That was an interesting dive and got to get some experience at looking at wrecks. That's how I think a lot of people start off as shallow shoreline and then work ourselves deeper.
Yeah, definitely. So, one of the things before we get into the talking about some of the wreck hunting history that I know you and I have kind of similar views on is what's happened to so many of the wrecks. When I first started, I remember coming across this shipwreck furniture stuff, because we had a guy over here named Clark Willick who was making shipwreck furniture. And you still see a lot of stuff, Sea Loom Antiques, a Great Lakes Shipwreck Company out of Charlevoix, a lot of guys were making shipwreck furniture. And oh my God, I just thought that was the most awful thing in the world. Like, how can they do this without being prosecuted? And, and we really look at them with disdain. And I remember meeting Clark Willick one time at the Ghost Ships Festival, and I really regret, we were cordial with him, but, what a great guy he was. And now the worm has turned. The only pieces of these ships that are left anywhere nowadays are the parts that were recovered, because now they're all getting torn apart by the zebra and quagga mussels. And, I've been studying Robert Gillespie's work up at Beaver Island as part of my research up there, and he made a lot of furniture. And it's an area where you have done a lot of research as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I started in the early days, pouring through all the books that everybody's read. And I kind of had a knack for finding wrecks that were findable. And that's what I focused on mostly, wrecks in my neck of the wood that could be found someday. And this is when the deepest wrecks being found were still in less than 200 feet of water. So, early on, they started transitioning to the 220-foot mark, a 275-foot mark, and things got deeper and deeper. And about that time, too, 2002, 2005, 2008, the internet really started to develop with online databases and things like that. So really it kind of switched from going into the basement of historical societies or library, microfilm archives, or wherever you can find anything, to being able to do almost everything online and really have access to amazing, articles. So like newspaper.com and things like that. You can really get in there and find things, cross-reference them with different newspapers, do keyword searches. The optical character recognition has just really come a long way in the past, again, decade, to where now these papers are searchable. Now that wasn't the way back then. So you can cover a lot of territory in a short amount of time. You can produce a lot of information compared to the old days of manually going through, archives somewhere or going down to Bowling Green or wherever you had to go.
Yeah, definitely. And so, as we started, as a lot of these wrecks were found back in the day, though, by these guys who made furniture out of them. And I think,
yeah,
part of the ethos that's changed is that a lot of people, don't see this as being a negative thing anymore. That the furniture makers actually did a lot to help preserve, in some ways, these wrecks. Your thoughts on that?
I understand it, and I have a friend, Jim Sawtell, who lives up in St. Ignace right now, and they used to call him the Raper of the Wrecks. That was his nickname, and in the 1987 law had a lot to do with him, because he was not only taking wood off wrecks or finding, he was dynamiting wrecks and building all kinds of furniture. And a little bit too extreme. These weren't loose boards they were taking. They were starting to grab stuff and lift large portions of wreck off the bottom and take them and converting them to furniture. So they were stripping these wrecks. This was pre-quagga. And again, the wrecks back then were maybe 100 years old. Now they're, 150 years old. There's a big difference. That picture there is of me. I've got my foot up on my coffee table. That is a rudder from the schooner Metropolis, which wrecked off Old Mission Peninsula, I think 73, somewhere around there. And the bench behind there is another piece of shipwreck furniture. This is a collection I bought, and the two other benches to the left there are part of the collection. So I've got this big collection here, and yeah, there it is. And it's pretty neat. That table is 10 feet long, 4 feet wide, weighs over 600 pounds. I mean, it's pretty amazing. It's on display at the Grand Traverse Lighthouse Museum in Northport, Michigan, there at the tip of the Leelanau Peninsula. So that was lifted off by a gentleman by the name of Bill Garton. And he lifted off that and part of a ship. And what they did is they took two railroad tanker tanks and they welded I-beams across, and they went over from Charlevoix to Old Mission Peninsula, ripped off this rudder and brought it up, and then ripped off part of the side of the ship and brought it up underneath the rudder and brought it back to Charlevoix to make it into furniture. Well, as they got close to Charlevoix, the weather picked up, and they lost the whole side of the ship. Fell, gone forever, you know. And in part of their salvaging, they ripped the Metropolis in two, so half of it's in shallow water, half of it's in 100 feet of water, you know, all busted up. But there is some beautiful furniture to remind us of it. So that, you know, that is a tough question. And I don't know what the right answer is. Now we have at least a piece. Now the rudder of this vessel is, you know, on display. People can see it, they can touch it. Where normally maybe a few snorkelers might see it and it get buried and unburied by the sand. So what is the right answer?
Well, and it would be gone too. You know, I think part of the downside, this is a double-edged sword, like I said, because on the upside, this might be the only thing that's left of this wreck in 50 years because this stuff decays. It really does. We have wrecks already on Lake Superior in high energy zones where the wood's all gone, right? But the downside to this that I see is, you know, what I encountered with Bill Garton, his work, and also with Robert Gillespie's work at Beaver, is that you see all these things that have this plaque on them that say what ship they're from, and half the time it's the wrong ship. The one the case in point is the bark Sunnyside at North Fox Island is not from the Sunnyside at all. It's from the James Platt, I think. There are two hulls there on that long tail that sticks out of North Fox Island. But you know, if you read the articles about the Sunnyside, it's extremely clear that she went down in deep water to the northeast of North Fox Island. So I mean, that can't be her. So yeah, these guys, you know, they preserved stuff, but at the same time, they weren't the most careful of researchers.
No, and they still argue about what's from what and the name of things. I've got a few lamps from the Sunnyside and some lamps from the Metropolis. I probably got 5 or 6 shipwreck furniture lamps, number of tables, and yeah, they didn't have access to the research, and they weren't necessarily researchers doing this. They were doing this to make a living. There's a restaurant and bar interior right there. That was another thing that Jim Sawtell did. He did the bar up on Beaver Island, the tween decks up on Mackinac Island. In Charlevoix, I don't remember, too many names to remember, but there's a large building in Charlevoix with a lot of shipwreck stuff still in it, veneered wood, and the bar top is a giant slab of wood from a wreck. Pretty amazing stuff. So, you know, again, I think one of these bars, they tore it all out and just threw it away, you know, when they were done. So there was a shelf life on that too.
Oh man.
But yeah, the artifacts are an interesting thing to discuss. There's so many artifacts out there, and they're just going to rot away. So what is the answer? Just leave them down there? I mean, you know, I understand not letting private people bring them up and it ends up in somebody's living room and ends up getting tossed, but there's got to be a good middle ground where we can kind of share and these artifacts maybe publicly. Some Lake Erie divers brought up interesting idea of, okay, salvage the artifacts, then sell them because a collector is going to appreciate them and it's going to make it worthwhile for people to try to salvage artifacts. So that's an interesting take on it. I don't know where I stand on it necessarily, but I think it's a discussion worth having and maybe something we all need to start thinking about as our world changes.
Yeah, definitely. That's one way to get the artifacts all brought up. If you had that impetus to do it right now, the closest most states will ever come is saying, well, if you can find an accredited museum that's willing to sponsor it, we may, you know, very rarely issue a recovery permit. And some of this stuff that's down there, you know, that's in deep water, you know, even in deep water, it's not going to be there in 100 years. These things are collapsing. So I don't know. I think the ethos around it is changing, but I don't know what direction it'll go. You and I, Ross, are probably going to get called on to play a part in this. And, you know, it's a good conversation for us to have.
Yeah, I think so. You know, in the early days, they were trophies you would get off. Or you'd get a plate, you would get a dead eye, you would have something as a trophy. If you went and gave a talk or showed your friends, you would have it. It's trophy hunting. You know, today's trophy is photographs and video. There's very talented photographers and videographers out there. nobody really wants to see this stuff. A person have these old artifacts, they want to see the images because you can go right down to the wreck. You don't even need to be certified as a diver anymore. You can look at these pictures and know just about what it's like to be down there. And so that's quite a shift also. It's no longer the trophy hunting and having something to remind you of your dive. You have that with photography or imagery. A GoPro camera now. They're inexpensive. Almost everybody has them. Back 15 years ago, if you had an underwater video setup, I mean, that was a lot of money, and that was, it was something.
Yeah, I know in my case, I like to have the old original photos of the ships, the stereopticon views, the old books and things from that era. Like a lot of these pictures are as old as the ship, and so I enjoy having that as well. But I also like to dive them and see the remains. But I have to apologize. We kind of got ahead of ourselves. We were talking wreck hunters there. Let's get back to that a little bit. So we were talking about the first generation wreck hunters, and you were particularly talking about Dave Trotter. Tell me a little bit more about some of the other guys that you and I, and some of them are going to be on the show coming up, but that helped shape your career.
Ralph Wilbanks and Captain Steve Howard, the Numa searchers. When in our early days with the MSRA, we teamed up with Clive Cussler and in the Numa team, and he sponsored searching for Flight 2501. And so that was another opportunity. I spent a lot of hours out with those guys on the water, and they search in the ocean, they search all over the place. But again, their philosophy was similar to Dave Trotter's on, a lot of it is attitude, having the right attitude and going out there and searching. And so spending time with those guys again was very valuable training to have that you can't get at a college anywhere. You can't take a course and learn how to hunt for shipwrecks. You kind of have to find somebody who knows what they're doing. So those guys were pretty influential. And again, that was back in the MSRA days. Again, very talented group, and they had a way of presenting it to the public. And that's another aspect of shipwreck hunting is when you find a shipwreck, what do you do with it? And how do you share that information? So I always look at it as wreck hunting is my passion, but sharing history and the information with the public, it gives that purpose. So it really adds that depth to it and makes it worthwhile and satisfying. And that's really changed too. We talk about the technology of video cameras changing, researching online changing. Well, the media has changed, as we all know, drastically, especially the last 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
You might do a press release 15, 20 years ago, and now, you better link up with somebody who does a really good web story on it, has a large base in a big city that it can hopefully get viral. It's just a changing, it's ever evolving. Every aspect of this is evolving. And I guess when you're younger, you don't see the evolution until you get older and look back and go, wow, things have really changed.
Definitely. I know in my case, Jim Kennard was one of the people who taught me how to do a press release and how to publicize, a release. And he learned, that himself. And he's one of the first generation of wreck hunters. You and I work with some of the same people. I worked a lot with Steve Radovan and Harry Zeich and folks on this side of the lake. But I know you and I both know Paul Ehorn quite well.
Yeah.
He's a guy that he's going to be on the show here. He's had some, I think, a little bit of health challenges. I think he had a hip replacement, but he'll be on. And an interesting guy who has done a lot of stuff. He knows more about side scan than anyone I've ever met.
I linked up with Paul in the early days of the Westmoreland because it was at a depth. Paul has a special skill set that is desirable if you want to obtain a certain result. So one thing I remember is we had a lot of mutual friends, and one thing everybody said is, if Paul says something, that's it. His word is his bond. He's just a straight shooter, trustworthy guy. And we linked up early on with the Westmoreland project because our plan was, hey, if we found the gold, we were just going to disappear. I mean, you wouldn't hear anything about it, and that was it. But I know if I had to try to lift something heavy off I'd kill myself. Now, it sounds a little crazy, but the legend of this ship is such that, by the time you figure out how much we're talking, 18-20 million dollars worth of gold. That's a little bit of a interesting thing to have to face, because it's a life-changing event. What would you do for $7-8 million? Well, a lot. So we linked up and we did a lot together. It was pretty hush hush at the time, and but he was a diver, a fantastic natural diver, and we looked for a few wrecks together too. The Jarvis Lord early on, and we still talk fairly regularly and keep caught up on stuff. And yeah, he's probably one of the greatest natural divers I've ever seen. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, another guy that we both know pretty well who's going to be on the show is Tom Farnquist, another first generation, I think, kind of guy,
Yeah.
who is still around.
Yeah, quite a notable guy. Founded the museum up there in Whitefish Point. So, what you see is you find people that have multiple skill sets. So to be able to pull off something like that in that location and still do the diving and the searching and the researching, I mean, that's a pretty remarkable person to take their passion like that. I mean, one thing I recognize with a lot of these people is they're a little crazy about shipwrecks, and I totally get it. I get obsessed at times too, and I understand when it seems like they're doing some crazy stuff. It's like, oh, I get it. And Tom is one of those guys too that just has an amazing track record. I mean, almost a Indiana Jones type life,
Yeah.
And there's always a little swashbuckling side to these folks too. You find out some of the stories and things. It's like, oh, wow.
Yeah, Tom and I have talked over the years about. Are you hearing some feedback from my voice in the background there, Ross?
I am not.
Okay, I'm getting it, but maybe it's not coming onto the thing. That's all right then. Tom and I have talked about the Invincible that's there on Whitefish Point from 1816. It shows on the maps. We've often wanted to see if it's under the dune there, and put together sort of a pseudo-archaeological project to find it, So maybe we'll talk about that when he's on the show. But I know one thing you and I have talked about quite a bit is the fact that, you couldn't wreck hunt years ago without having a lot of money because you needed a big, big game sonar. And it really, one of the guys that I worked with early on when I was in my early 20s, because we're both Yoopers, is Dan Fountain. And Dan was always making the damnedest sonars. He'd take these old Lowrance, chart paper models, and he put their transducers going sideways off of a fish. He called it the Dan scan. But the thing that I think he brought to the Great Lakes was this idea of using these 266 kilohertz Garmins and putting them on a towfish. And now that's just changed the game. It's opened up wreck hunting to a lot more people. And I know you and I are both using them. What do you think of Dan and his contribution?
Fantastic. Anytime I ask for his help or ask it, he's always responded and been positive. Great help. Yeah, he kind of ushered this in. He was the first one. He embraced the technology early, and it's so inexpensive. I remember when the Hummingbird was it 1197 came out, and I ended up getting one of those, and that was expensive, but it was a game changer back 15 years ago or when that came out. And this Garmin is just wow. It's bang for the buck. It's amazing. And I think in 10 years they're going to have something that much better. You're going to be able to pick up aircraft, from a quarter mile away. The way the sonar is going. So yeah, that is a game changer. And I think we're almost seeing an acceleration of discoveries in the Great Lakes. I don't know if you've noticed, it used to be about one a year, one big one every other year. Now it's, pretty much a big one every year, maybe two big ones every year. And, all throughout the lakes. And again, I think this technology is improving and it's yielding more wrecks, even though the wrecks are getting fewer and fewer. The technology is getting better and better. So I think I bet you in the next 10 years, 95 98% of the wrecks are going to be found.
Maybe. I know there's a lot of deep ones out there, though, and there's also a lot of wrecks that not a lot of people know about.
Yeah.
Not in the common sources, and those are the ones that I tend to look for. Although one of the things that I'm torn about often is, I did my book Fathoms Deep about all the wrecks off Wisconsin. I kind of gave away every wreck that was ever lost out there, sort of my secret database, if you will. And I have a book I'm doing writing up on the beavers and the foxes, another one on the North Shore of Lake Michigan. That's the virgin territory. That's where a lot of the wrecks that haven't been found are, because they're kind of far away areas and
remote. Yeah, that's hiding a lot of them.
And so I'm kind of debating, well, how much do you say? Well, if you're going to write a proper book, you just have to let that information out. And part of what I try to do is work with younger guys, because otherwise, nobody's going to be doing this. And so a couple of younger guys that I know from up in the UP and from actually down in your area who are, really interested in this. And I went from being sort of a curmudgeonly, secretive guy to being a lot more open to these younger fellows and trying to, actually give them more information and not be so, well, how I've been in the past.
Yeah, you hate to give out too much information, have one stolen out from under you. That's a tough one to take. But I kind of look at it, when other wreck hunters find a wreck I'm interested in, that I don't have to do all the work for it. I can watch their videos, I can learn from what they've done. So I've kind of over the years loosened up, and when somebody finds something, hey, great, now I know, and I don't have to go out and look for it myself. Of course, if it's on my top 10 list, then it might be a problem, but I've been pretty lucky so far. But I think you're talking about Dusty and Chris, who they're the next generation. They understand social media. They have the latest equipment. They're making a splash.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a bunch of other guys too that I've been working with up in the Upper Peninsula who are really interested in this stuff. And it's a lot of fun to work with them. They're buying the right sonars. They're going out and looking for stuff and doing good research too. It's easier to do now. So, and you compare that to, the guys back in the day, like Jim Sawtell, or Calvin Deviney, who were working back in the 50s. That must be the world.
Yeah, dragging grapples or using World War II sonar technology, or I think I got a QE5 mag or something like that in my basement from Jim Sawtell, out of the 50s. Wow. And the thing is just massive, but they grabbed whatever they could out of military surplus and tried to convert it into wreck hunting stuff.
Yeah, it's incredible stuff. I know that Calvin Deviney made this most amazing set of shipwreck charts for the Great Lakes. And I have 2 full sets of them. They're from 1959 through 1961 for all 5 of the Great Lakes, and they have more wrecks than anybody, than anything to date. He must have been a really impressive researcher, and he was kind of driven by gold fever, I think, because he later went down to Florida and sort of became a treasure hunter. But those maps are extremely rare, but extremely good, even almost by today's standards.
Man, yeah. So, he was, and he had the North Shore Tug too, which ended up being a dive site off of Saugatuck. A lot of his work he did off that boat, the North Shore, and that had a long history too, and then it ended up sinking off of Saugatuck in the 1990s, I think.
Yeah, popular site now. But let's change gears a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about some of your wrecks that you found. I know over the years, you really developed as a researcher from kind of when we first met on the Helen, to today. You're one of the top researchers and wreck hunters, active on the Great Lakes now.
Oh, thank you. I don't know if I agree with that, but thank you for the compliment.
Oh, well, I think you are, and I think a lot of people would acknowledge that. But tell me a little bit about that journey you took, and then about some of your more recent finds.
Well, we had a change in life back, probably close to 15 years ago, and We were expecting a young son, and it just so happened everything turned out, and we ended up moving north of where we lived up to the Leelanau area, Grand Traverse area, about 2.5 hours from Grand Rapids, where I was based out of. And one of the deals was I would have to be a stay-at-home dad. So I was brought to this new area away from southwest Michigan, where I was doing all my shipwreck hunting, up to the Manitous. I'm 20 minutes from the boat launch right by the Manitou Islands, and I love to research anyway. So I was able to turn loose up here, take my son with me. I would run him to libraries and turn him loose, and it was quite a thing we would do together. Historical societies. He was my little research partner as a very young man. And I was able to amass a lot of stuff on local wrecks. And, one of those that really intrigued me was the Westmoreland. And that's the one I kind of set my eyes on and decided to go after. And, uh, yeah, there she is right there. That's a line drawing of the Westmoreland. They said there was a photograph that existed of her, but it burned in Collingwood in 1970. There was a fire, and it was destroyed. So this is a line drawing based on that photo. I would have loved to seen a photo of her, but
Ross, when did she go down? What year?
she went down in 1854. She was built in Cleveland in 1853 and sank on December 7th, 1854. So she was only a year old.
So that picture must have been a Daguerre type. So it was a one of a kind. That's sad. If she had survived in their 5 years, there probably would be maybe a stereopticon view. I look for that kind of stuff, one of a kind photos. But yeah, it's probably gone.
Yeah,
anyway,
that's too bad.
Sorry to interrupt.
But your photos that you post online, I'm starting to get into modeling, and that really helps tremendously. So we saw a picture earlier of Cal Cothrati, and the slide we just have up of the rec site. So I kind of linked in with Cal Cothrati and Steve Weimer, and kind of hung out with them a little bit. And when I decided to write a book on the Westmoreland, I needed somebody to do the artwork, and Cal did the artwork, and it was amazing. I mean, he was able to take some video and underwater pictures and just capture the essence of the wreck. And
astounding artist too, and he's another guy that I've asked to be on the show. He's a guy from over here on my side of the lake.
Yeah, very, very talented. And, this is what I like. I like that kind of artistic approach, almost the painting look, the Ken Marshall type image. And it just gives you the feel of how, creepy these wrecks are. I mean, we call them underwater haunted houses because they're just dark and gloomy. And, there's such a history behind them, but he really captures that in his artwork. So I was lucky to link with him. And this wreck I had amassed, so many people had looked for it that I amassed their stories. Every 10 years there was a new expedition of, crazy people looking for the Westmoreland in her treasures. And that led me to a lot of interesting things. Of course, I love wreck hunters anyway, so I, got to study up how they were doing it in the 1870s, the 1920s, the 1950s, and so on. And then I happened to get lucky and find it. And really, I did put a lot of work into it, but I was pretty lucky to come across it.
So Ross, you gotta tell us all here. We're all wondering, what did you do with the whiskey?
So if you look at the wreck, they would load items in through the gangways, and then there were hatches below the passenger deck, and they would lower them down into the bilge level. And that's where we think a lot of the cargo and the whiskey is down in that level. And unfortunately, because of collapses, there's only a small little, maybe 2 foot by 3 foot opening to get down in there, and it's filled with silt. If you look down maybe a foot into there, it's silt, I'm sure, from organic matter and things, the corn that was in there, the flour. And, to get at the whiskey, it's like I can go down to the corner liquor store and get a bottle of whiskey and not risk my life, And That's the way I would go. So it's probably still in there. There's a lot of truth to these legends, I believe, and it's probably sitting in the hold. And again, that's why, so this was carrying the supplies for the garrison of Mackinac Island in 1854. So it's probably got uniforms, muskets, all types of things in that bilge level hold that are just sitting down there, in a very good state of preservation. It's a shame to leave them down there and just rot away,
Yeah, Ross,
It would be nice to be able to bring those up and share those.
Yeah, is there a manifest for what she was carrying in the Mackinac manifests that have been digitized?
I was not able to locate it at the time, at 10 years ago, so I didn't see the manifest.
Have you searched the online database of the manifests that Walter Lewis put up yet, by any chance?
No, you know what? I haven't. I contacted the Historical Society that were up at Fort Mackinac at the time, and they didn't have it. But no, I have not checked there.
Yeah, so the problem with the manifests was they were distributed across 3 or 4 different libraries and institutions. They'd almost been thrown out. And so the Association for Great Lakes Maritime History did a project to locate them all. And then we went up there, John Polisek and Walter Lewis, and they digitized thousands of them, going from about 1799 to 1860. And they are now all online in high resolution, and each one has metadata about the name of the ship and the date of it and what it was carrying, and then you can look at the manifest itself. I will send you that link, and as soon as we get off of this, I'm going to go look for it.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Because if you can find the manifests for the Westmoreland, I bet you there's more than one. That would be really cool. But yeah, the Mackinac manifests are just a treasure mine, that a gold mine that people haven't even accessed yet, because a lot of people don't know about that. They're all online now. So
now, would the manifest have made it there, or would it have gone down with the ship?
They had to file the manifest when they went through Mackinac. It'll show them when they came through the first time. It won't show them on the way back. So
gotcha.
You'll probably find the first manifest for the Westmoreland. So anyway, just came to mind as we were talking.
Yeah, that'd be very cool to see what they had, because she was coming out of Buffalo. She would run Buffalo to Chicago and back.
Yeah.
And she was making her last run of the year. She was going to go back to Buffalo and get stored away. And boy, she hit a storm and iced up on top and sprung a leak, and that was it.
And boy, I sure did like reading the book. And what I liked about it was how you told all the stories of the other people that had looked, and gave this, not just a history of the wreck event and of the ship, but a really good cultural history of the effort to find her. It was like walking through the history of, Great Lakes wreck hunting.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I enjoyed as wreck hunters and their stories. So it was kind of, I was lucky to be able to find this vessel, because I had so many people that looked for it and claimed to have found it in the past.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit about the wrecks up on Skilligalee. I know that was another one that you kind of stumbled on a shipwreck graveyard up there, didn't you?
Yeah. On Skilligalee, I found quite I think 6 different wreck sites. And so a couple things that was going on there is I was coming off of a knee surgery. So I was pretty messed up I believe it was 2014. And I needed to get back into shape, and I wanted to work on my diving, but some shallow stuff, to search for some shallow stuff. And Skilligalee seemed like the place. But actually, in 2011, I had decided to start searching for the Peshtigo and St. Andrews. So I started putting the plans in action, and that was training to be able to get used to that area. Used to the boat launch, being able to handle the boat myself, to be able to search for myself, because a lot of times I would have to be out there, for 20 hours straight, and I couldn't find anybody to go with me, nor did I want to just have anybody else on the boat. So Skilligalee was kind of the training grounds to set up for that search for the Peshtigo and St. Andrews. And there's quite a lot of wrecks around there. And I think I found the bow of the 80 Patchen, just this massive bow.
Wow.
But again, with these shallow wrecks, it's very hard to prove that's what it is. I'm looking at this image on the screen right now. That is what we believe is the walrus. Now, I have to give credit to Steve Weimer. Steve Weimer actually discovered this. And I'll tell you how. A buddy of mine bought the White Shoal Light up in the Straits of Mackinac, and Cal Colthrati and Steve Weimer were out, up visiting us there, and we were diving the Cayuga. And on the way back, we cut across Gray's Reef because I had been doing some searching. There's a few wrecks around there I wanted to find, and it's so remote it hasn't been searched. So we looked around a little bit. Well, Steve went and sat on the bow. And mind you, I had my new Garmin, I had the Humminbird, all this equipment like this. And I remember sitting in the boat talking with Cal, and Steve yells, "Hey, I see something. I think I see a wreck." And I looked at the sonar screens, and sure enough,
Wow.
and so I spent all this money on the sonar equipment, and Steve found it by just looking down and seeing it on the bottom. So I was a little like, oh man, yeah,
Very
some
neat.
wreck hunter I am. But yeah, a busted up schooner again, sitting out there near Gray's Reef. I think the Walrus wrecked 1868, 1866, something like shallow water, disarticulated, very remote area.
Sure.
This picture here is of the Thomas Kingsford, which is, a lot of these are from one of my favorite books, Shipwrecks of the Straits of Mackinac by the Feltners. And, the first half of the book was wrecks that had been found, and the second half is wrecks that are still need to be found. And the Kingsford was one of them. And I searched the area right about where it said. Now the Feltners had looked for it by aircraft, but the water wasn't clear enough at the time. I found it in 25 feet of water, and we snorkeled it and filmed it, and it was just, the water was so clear you could see like it wasn't even there in 25 feet. But just schooner described as it was at the time. I think it wrecked in 1871, 1872, somewhere in there.
Sure.
And this, I think, is a WS Lions at White Shoal Light. And we've only dove part of it, and we think the keel is a little bit further away. But again, that's such a remote area, the White Shoal, to get to. It's probably 20 miles from the nearest boat ramp.
Oh yeah.
And that's across Village Ramp, which is the worst boat ramp in Michigan. It's terrible.
Yeah. So one of the wrecks that really made headlines a couple of years ago that you found was the Kimball, and another beautiful, beautiful painting by Cal. How did you find that? It seems like it was a needle in a haystack.
Yeah. Well, so again, it's one of those things. I had gotten the Garmin, and my cousins were up visiting from Hayhira, Georgia, and they have property nearby, and we hang out in the summers. And they said, "Hey, can you run us out to South Manitou Island?" And I said, "Sure, but on the way there, I'm going to turn on my new sonar and try it out." And I ran a little bit of, I threw the fish in, ran a little bit, and about 10 minutes into running it, I ran across this tiny target. I said, "Well, it doesn't seem very big, but it's something there." Well, I went back about a week later and had a better look at it, and something spiked off the bottom 90 feet. And I was like, that is crazy. And then I got some sonar images, and I'm like, actually now it's exactly the way it looked. But I was looking at it like, what the heck is that down there? So it's in about 300 feet of water. So I called Steve Weimer and I said, "Hey, you interested in diving, a wreck?" So he said, "Sure." He came over and dove down, and he says, "Man, this thing, it's a small schooner." I thought it was a bigger schooner. I was looking for the herd, and this was a smaller schooner. And he says, "This thing is just in perfect condition." So we had the pictures. It didn't ring the bell of anything that was missing in the area that I was aware of. So I looked online and I came across a wreck. It could be called the Emily, which is a schooner that disappeared out of Milwaukee in 1857.
Yep.
So I started researching that, but I showed the pictures to Paul Ehorn, and he says, "Hey, this thing has wire rope on it." And I was like, "Oh boy." So he was right. It had wire rope, which means it would be after the Civil War. So I had to go back to the drawing board, and I went through the Metzler database, every single schooner And of course, it didn't start with an A or a B or a C. I had to make it all the way to the W's, which took me, probably 2 hours, 3 hours a night for 3 weeks straight, just going through every single wreck till I came across the WC Kimball. And it's like, okay, this is supposed to be lost near Point Betsy, near Frankfurt, but it was a sail away. It disappeared, and it was heading up to Northport and around the Leelanau Peninsula to Traverse City. So I'm like, okay, everything fit about perfectly. And then Steve got back to it and got to dive it with a video camera, and we put an ROV down there at the same time, and we pretty much verified it was the Kimball. Again, there were some images available of the Kimball, even though she had a short life. She was built in Manitowoc in 1888 and sank in 1891. There's a great shot of her right there.
What a beautiful raking bow she had. Wow.
Yeah, clipper bow, a very sleek craft, almost no railing on her. I mean, that railing's maybe 2 feet high. So I think that led to her loss is she got caught in some seas in the spring, and I think the crew was washed overboard one by one, and turned her into a ghost ship and froze into a block of ice. It was mid-May when she sank, and she did hit a storm and just sank down in perfect shape
She
with a
clearly went.
lifeboat still attached to the stern.
Yeah, she clearly went down really, really slow. And then, of course, the big find this year that we've all been hearing about is the Jarvis Lord. That's quite an interesting wreck. What can you tell us about the Jarvis Lord?
100-foot or 180-foot bulk passenger steamer, 193 feet maybe. Bulk passenger steamer built in Marine City, Michigan, and a double deck vessel, one of the early lake boats of the lake boat design. And she was supposed to be within 2 miles of Glen Haven, which is where we started looking, which is where all the wreck hunters looked for her. The problem with that area is the drop offs. It drops down to 300 feet, within a mile of shore. And there's a lot of geology down there. Paul and I looked for it 2012, somewhere in there, with a Klein. And again, we found something that came off the bottom 15 feet, but it looked like geology. We just never proved what it was. So I started looking and just expanded the search area, and eventually got over, 5 miles from where it's supposed to be, and came across her, and then was able to deduce from her position, what happened. She more than likely bottomed out on the reef, the North Manitou Shoal there, cutting across a little too tight with a full load of iron ore, sprung a leak, and went down trying to make it to shore. Everybody survived. It was August, beautiful day. And this is Cal's artwork right there of the Jarvis Lord sinking. Now, there's only a couple images of her. And let's see here. Yeah, that's Cal's artwork right there. His version of her going down. She's pretty busted up. She's the exact opposite of the Kimball, where the Kimball you could bring up. There's no damage to her. You could bring it up and sail her again. The Jarvis Lord, impacted like a lot of ships carrying iron ore. There's a model I built with a friend. He's teaching me how to build ship models, so that sits in my rec room, and that's about a 3-foot version of the Jarvis Lord, 172nd. Very similar to the Vienna in design. Those were built about the same time. Launched about the same out of close shipyards that were close by, so they're very similar type vessels. And then they had the financial panic of 73, I believe, and not many vessels were built for a few years after that of this design. And then, of course, we went into the iron and steel hulls and got away from the wood-hulled vessels. Yeah, she's in about 220 feet of water, 210 feet of water. And I put the GPS coordinates on my website, michiganmysteries.com. And I wanted to share this one with divers. I mean, Steve and his partner, Katrina Colby, are the only 2 divers that have been on this wreck so far. So the GPS numbers are out there. She's about 2 miles from shore and, 210 feet of water. but I wanted to share this with the diving community. Like the Kimball, it's a case-by-case basis, which I share. The Kimball I felt was too delicate with those masts and the top masts in such perfect shape. Grappling into that, somebody could really damage that or pull the mast down. And that one I don't want to share publicly. This one, I think I put it out there as a dive target and add to what's in the Manitou Passage.
Well, Ross, I really give you credit for undertaking a model building. It's something that I've been interested in myself. I've actually started to think about it a little bit, but it's kind of what I do a lot of is antique book restoration and things like that, and I'm pretty busy with it. Otherwise, I'd try this. I actually have been working with Rocky Grow, who's a model builder over on this side of the lake, to commission a barkentine, a Great Lakes barkentine. But it's a lot of work, and I really commend you for getting into this. I've been very interested in getting interested in model building myself.
Yeah, I was lucky to link up with a guy this summer who's an old school model builder, and I said, I'm going to build models of all the wrecks I find, because that's just going to force me to study the wreck site and the ships that much more closely. And his name's Howard Burns. Sadly, he passed away December 27th. I knew when we linked up, I knew he was terminally ill, but he took the last few months of his life to work with me and train me. And I can do it. There's some things I didn't get a chance to learn, like the sails, but a lot of it I can do. So I hope to produce some good-looking models of the stuff I find.
Boy, that's excellent. Do the models of all the wrecks that you find. I really commend you for that. I really am impressed by model builders just because of the patience and the handiwork that it takes. So, well, we're up on the end of our hour. That went a lot faster than I thought, Ross. And there's always so much more that we probably could talk about, But we had a lot of people, who really enjoyed the show tonight. We've got a lot of good comments. As you might expect, everybody already searched the Mackinac manifests, and the Westmoreland is not in them.
Nice. I like this. I like this group effort.
Thank you to our guests for the crowdsourcing. And thank you, everybody who watched us tonight. It's been a real pleasure, Ross, having you on. And I wish we have so few opportunities really to talk, so it's been a great opportunity to get to know each other again. And we talk always, every guest and I talk before we meet up before the show to, kind of do a tech session. So it's been great touching base with you again, Ross. We should make sure it's not 20 years until we do this again.
Yeah. Well, if you make it over in this neck of the woods in the summer, let me know.
I will. And if you find your way over here, let me know. I'm going to be up on the northern part of the lake, and I might be out at the Beavers. I'll let you know what my plans are. It'd be great to get together and have a couple of beers and talk stupid about shipwrecks. That's one of my favorite things to do. So
I like it.
Well, folks, I want to remind everybody that we are going to have a Zoom room tonight. The Zoom room will be let's see, it's 9:03 in Michigan and it's 8:03 in Wisconsin. Why don't we all come back in 20 minutes? I'm going to post the Zoom room link right on the Facebook page. So watch the Facebook page. The link will appear there. Come on into the Zoom room in 20 minutes and grab an adult beverage. Use the little boys' room. And save your questions for Ross Richardson. Ross, thanks again for doing this. For those of you who want to share the show, it'll be uploaded to YouTube later tonight. And Ross, I'll send you a copy. All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.
And, oh, God, I got the dreaded network error. Hold on. We're still live. I'm going to just hang tight. I'm gonna reboot the session. Load site. Changes you made may not be saved. Don't go anywhere, Ross. We'll just wait. Sometimes what happens, I don't want to lose the recording, but it shouldn't. I'm going to say reload anyway. Looks like I lost Ross, but I'm going to cancel and end the program.